This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
One of the most misunderstood characters in the Bible is Nimrod. Believe it or not, welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. Yes, Nimrod. We think we know a lot about him, but the Bible really tells us very little. So where can we go to find out more? What if we could identify him as a historic character? Our guest this week believes he has done just that, and he is a guy we turn to for expert analysis of biblical topics. He is a professor of Bible history and exegesis at Brooks Bible College in St. Louis. Groundbreaking research into a couple of books we highly recommend. The World's Oldest Alphabet, Hebrew, as the language of the Proto-Consonantal Script, and Origins of the Hebrews, which expands and extends that research. Again, groundbreaking, a lot of academic blowback on this one from other professional scholars who don't like having their assumptions and their worldviews challenged. But the research seems solid to me. His new book, Nimrod the Empire Builder, Architect of Shock and Awe. We are honored to welcome back to the program Dr. Doug Petrovich. Well, Doug, it's good to see you again. Some of the most fascinating conversations that Sharon and I have had over the last couple of years were about your book, The Origins of the Hebrews. And of course, I'm happy to tell people that I've cited your paper on the historicity of the Pharaoh of the Exodus, multiple books, I think 3 or 4 at this point, because I think it pinpoints not only the when, but the why that God did certain things based on who Amenhotep was choosing as his personal gods. But you've tackled another subject here that is very well known to many of our viewers or listeners, but I think a lot of what we think we know about this character Nimrod is not really biblical. I think a lot of it is things that we're reading into Scripture or things that we assume because we associate him with Babylon. What made you interested, first of all, in taking on Nimrod as a subject, and then from there, how do we know what we know, and what exactly do we know about Nimrod?
Oh, wow. There's a big answer behind all that. Maybe we can cut it up, but yeah, how did I get there? It all starts, Derek, going back to my love for the book of Genesis. It's one of the books that I gravitate toward the most in the Scripture. It's Ephesians in the New Testament, pretty much number 1, and it's pretty much Genesis in the Hebrew Bible. And it's just because it addresses so many important things about how things get started, what God's trying to do overall, where he's going with things. So anything in the book of Genesis just attracts me like a magnet. But Nimrod is fascinating because number one, it's very cryptic, right? It's very short. It's very mysterious. It's very limited in what it says. And importantly, the name Nimrod is never really used by ancient writers to identify this person. In other words, usually we can tie a biblical figure who's popular, who's well-known, who's important in the ancient biblical world. We can tie him to a historical figure fairly easily. Pharaoh Necho, it's an easy tie. Shishak, that's an easy tie to Shishonk of Egypt, and so forth. So there are a lot of easy connections, but Nimrod's hard because we don't have such an easy connection. So what really, though, kind of moved me in a direction is a course I took in my PhD program, a year-long course on Mesopotamian archaeology, and I learned more than I can shake a stick at in that course. And one of the things I walked away with was a firm conviction that we can identify who Nimrod is in the historical record based on a comparison with the ancient rulers of, pre-Mosaic time, because it had to be before Moses. And if Moses, you refer to my Origins of the Hebrews book and my article on the Exodus Pharaoh, Amenhotep II. If I'm right, and I'm not alone, but if I'm right on the dating of that, and it's the middle of the 15th century BC that the Exodus happens, then Nimrod has to predate that, doesn't he? So if we go back in history, we can look at options. Who are the candidates? And so my PhD course kind of allowed me to to just kind of play with the options and look at it. And one stood out above all the others. He just seemed to have all of the right characteristics that tie us to Nimrod.
You don't connect him to the Tower of Babel incident then, do you?
I don't. And in fact, Derek, one thing that's fun for me about the new book I just wrote, Nimrod the Empire Builder, Architect of Shock and Awe. And as we speak, it's in the typesetter's hands, and probably by the time listeners hear this, it will be either in print or really close. But my book ended up being 70,000 words. And as you and I were talking before the broadcast began, you read my article that I published in 2013 in a journal. It's a peer-reviewed journal called the Journal of Evangelical Theological Society. I published it in 2013, identifying Nimrod with a historical figure who is Sargon of Akkad, the first empire builder in world history. And I did all the technical things there, right? But that was only 13,000 words long. The opportunity for writing a book is I got to expand everything. I wasn't so confined by an editor's requirements for space. So one of the things I did with the book is I wrote an introduction. And in that introductory chapter, I deal with Mosaic authorship, which is, by the way, is very staunchly under attack nowadays. It has been for a long time. As severely now as ever in our Christian colleges and seminaries and universities. Most professors now, it's over 50%. If you were to poll the professors, over 50% would say they don't believe in the Mosaic authorship of the first 5 books of the Bible.
Wow.
Well, so I did, in my introductory chapter, I did a portion on Mosaic authorship and why we can, as Christian believers, have confidence, even in an academic sense, as well as a simple Bible reader sense. So logically, strategically, biblically, we have lots of reason to believe that Moses wrote this. But then in that introductory chapter, I also wrote a portion on Moses's literary conventions that he uses. And I narrow in on one that's really important that very few Genesis commentators over the decades and now centuries have talked about. That's extremely important. And it applies completely to the question of Nimrod, because getting to the question that you raised, let me express it in a way that it's going to kind of hopefully click with the listeners. Nimrod appears in the 10th chapter of Genesis, right? But the Tower of Babel occurs in the 11th chapter, chapter 11.
Right.
So you would think logically, if this is written like Luke's gospel, right? Luke says he expressly wrote his gospel in a way that it's a chronological account. So you can trust that everything that's in there, unless it's, I don't know, in maybe some individual passage in Luke, there's something a little bit out of kind of chronological order because he wanted to do it that way. But apart from that, the whole thing's chronological. But Moses never makes that claim. So if Nimrod comes earlier in Genesis, why is the Tower of Babel after it? If it in fact is what I'm claiming is it's earlier, right? Mm-hmm. Well, long story short, and again I go into the details in the book, but what Moses does typically throughout the book of Genesis, over and over again, and I like to term it this way: he flies the plane at 40,000 feet first. If you will, he gives us the timeline, right? Usually on a chronological scale of the major things that go on from a certain point in time, beginning in a certain point in time, until an ending point in time. And then when Moses is done flying the plane at 40,000 feet, he gets out of his plane and he walks through that same area that he just flew over, and he goes he drills down in detail with something that was in the timeline. So less significant things he treats in the 40,000 feet view. More significant things he drills down and starts into them after he's finished giving that timeline. This happens over and over and over. I've got examples cited in my book. I won't get into all of that. But the bottom line is, it just so happens that chapter 10 of Genesis is one of those 40,000 foot views. And so the context of the Nimrod story is within the greater view. It's not as important, but when he gets done flying that plane at the end of chapter 10 and he goes into chapter 11, now he's on the ground and he wants to put things under a microscope for us. And he really shows us, the bark of the tree under the microscope and so forth, of everything that's going on that's important at a moment or a set of moments within that greater scheme of things. And that focus is the Tower of Babel events, because it's really important for Moses to communicate and teach his audience how we can explain people speak in different languages. It's a really weird thing that we speak in different languages. Go to another country and hang out there for a few weeks and see how much stress life will bring to you. I moved to Russia, right? Lived there 10 years. We did that. I can't tell you how much stress we experienced. It's very difficult. But Moses needed to explain that. So he drilled down once he got out of that plane, and he gave us what's in chapter 11. That's why the event of the Tower of Babel, fiasco appears after the Nimrod story. So again, I go into much greater detail in the book, but that's how to explain the why behind it.
Okay, so chapter 10, the Table of Nations. Basically, Moses gives us the genealogy of all the sons of Noah and all of their descendants. And then he goes back, zooms back around and says, okay, now we're going to do a close-up pass on this one particular incident, which, if you go back then and look at Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, may have some explanatory power about why the world is in such a mess. When God numbered the nations, Genesis 10, he numbered them according to the number of the sons of God.
Yes.
But setting that aside then, unless you want to expand on that, because I think, Deuteronomy 32
that's worth a moment or two.
Sure.
Which is this. The peg that Moses goes back to, right? With Genesis 11 and the Tower of Babel, what's the peg that he connects it to? It's the place in those, and by the way, it's not one timeline in Genesis chapter 10, as usually, it's 3 timelines for each one of the sons of Noah. Because what Moses is doing is he's giving us kind of the lay of the land from the perspective of each one of those 3 sons of Noah as we get down to Abram, right? So it starts with Noah, ends with Abram, and then the story picks up from there. But in chapter 11, the tie-in, as we go back to the 40,000 foot level, is where it says that a certain man named Eber, who's a part of the line of Shem, one of the 3 sons of Noah, right? And that's the line through whom the covenant figures, the later covenant figures will come, Abram and Isaac and Jacob, right? And all of the Israelites. So, but the tie back in chapter 10 is that the son of Aber is named Peleg. And then Moses gives us a parenthetical thought right there. He says, and I'm just paraphrasing, in his days, the earth was divided, right? In his days, Peleg, the earth was divided. So Eber was alive, and he had the son of his, who's part of that lineage that goes it ends up ultimately going to Messiah, right, through Abram. He gives us that connection. And he says, with the son of Aber, and by the way, Aber is the father of the Aberites. If we were speaking Akkadian, we would call them Heberites. And the Heberites are the Hebrews. When the Bible introduces Abram, what does Moses say? He says, Abram the Hebrew. And that should ring a bell with us. That's telling us, when we think of Hebrews, we're misunderstanding if we only limit it to Jacob and his offspring, right? No. Abram was a Hebrew, was a Heberite, was an Eberite. So the whole point is that his lineage, his family tree, goes back in time all the way to Eber. But anyway, in Eber's day, Peleg is alive already. And in his day, while Peleg is already alive, we have a division. What's the division? A lot of my dear friends have the wrong view on this, Derek. I love them to death. They've just got the wrong view, though. They think that division is the dividing up of Pangaea into the continents. Wonderful idea, but Moses was not an ancient geographer. He was not an ancient geologist. He was not a student of continental drift. No. He was talking about what he was going to go in great detail in Genesis 11. The dividing of peoples, right? According to what? Along what lines? Familial lines. God divided people according to families. So in God's judgment, there was this element of mercy in all of it, right? He didn't just, put down the hammer, right? It wasn't for putting down the hammer. He showed beautiful mercy, and that he divided up people according to their families. So he made it so that the father and the son and the grandson, they all spoke the same language. And isn't that wonderful? That I think reflects the heart of God and his love for families. How he made this world with the family unit as the organic core of it all.
So the timing then of the Tower of Babel is later in history than we think. I'm going to put some links in the show notes, by the way, because I know that you and I agree that Babel was not at Babylon, despite the similarity in names. It was at the ancient city of Eridu, which was very historically and very important religiously in the history of Mesopotamia. But I had always placed it at the end of the Uruk period of history, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, which would be about 3100 BC. This would bring it into the third millennium BC, I think.
Here's the thing, Derek. I also agree that the what I call the post-Babel dispersion occurred during the late Uruk period, the final phase of the Uruk period.
Okay,
because
all right.
There are only two.
I'm making the same mistake in conflating the two events again in my head.
Okay.
So, if we put it at the end of the Uruk period, Nimrod is not in that period of history any longer. That's what I need to get through my head.
Right. Nimrod
because
is
he's
later.
not connected. Right.
He's around 2300. So he rules for, 55, 56 years. All of a sudden, I forget. It's right in that ballpark. Oh, I think actually the ancient manuscripts disagree on that. How long he, in what year of his reign did he die? Some of them say different numbers, but 55 is like the typical number that's used. So,
and you're talking now about Sargon of Akkad.
Yes, Sargon of Akkad. If I'm right that Nimrod is Sargon of Akkad, then that's around 2300 BC. Now, according to a standard conventional Mesopotamian archaeological periodization, in other words, if we're assigning dates on a timeline to ancient Mesopotamian archaeological periods, most scholars, as you were alluding to, would put the late Uruk period, the period I'm connecting to the post-Babel dispersion, when God scatters the people. They put that roughly between 3250 BC usually and 3000 BC, right in that ballpark, right? That's the late Uruk period for most scholars. But there's the whole question, and we don't really have time to get into it on this broadcast. We can talk about it another time, but there's a whole question related to and what's called an offset with the radiocarbon data from 1400 BC and earlier.
Right.
What that shows us is, and this offset is not created by Christians who are creationists who believe in a young earth model like I do, right? It's created by secular archaeologists and historians and Egyptologists. And what they've determined is there's a problem with what we know from history. Certain dates we know have to be right. And usually in antiquity, they line up with what we learn from organic material that's found in a datable level where archaeological work has been done, right? And they match up perfectly. But that matching up perfectly only continues as you go back in time until 1400 BC. Anything earlier than 1400 BC, it doesn't line up. So that being true, what we learn from science, if we're going to accept, as I do, a young Earth model, that the Earth is thousands of years old, 7,500 at the most, to, in that, if that's our framework, then all of a sudden we have to ask the question, well, if there's this offset, are the numbers right that are being used to assign to certain archaeological periods in time? So anyway, long story short, all that to say, I think that a right adjusting of that scale based on this offset would put the late Uruk period in right around 2650 or 2600 BC. So for me, that's when the Tower of Babel happened. So let's say 2625 or so, and give or take 25 years, is when the Tower of Babel happened. And then for me, 2300, 2310, 15, somewhere in there, those are when some of the important things going on in Sargon's reign. So that's the difference. 300 odd years difference.
Okay. And interestingly, as we're recording this, Skywatch TV is broadcasting a panel discussion in which I participated and tried to summarize the work of a physicist named Barry Setterfield, who's done some really amazing work on the zero-point energy model and how that, when God stretched out the heavens, try to condense this down to like 60 seconds or less, essentially added enough energy into the ether so that when light began to move through the ether, it as things stretched out during creation, encountered more and more resistance. And so the photons began encountering these obstacles, these virtual particles that slowed light down slightly. He calculated that in the first 6 days of creation, according to the biblical account in Genesis chapter 1, the universe experienced what secular scholars would consider about 6 billion years of history or something like that. So, but the bottom line is that scholars now know that time is not a constant, that radioactive decay, that atomic time, nuclear energy is essentially, it is not a constant. So it is entirely possible that archaeologists looking at these dates and trying to calculate using carbon-14 may be getting what appears to be a correct answer, but in fact, in other words, there may be some truth on both sides of this issue. Certainly the idea that the Tyrannosaurus Rex has got collagen that's still preserved in a 65 million year old leg bone, that's just right out.
That doesn't make sense that it's that old, right?
No, but your interesting, your model, I think is really got some interesting explanatory power, especially given the history of Sargon. What was it about Sargon the Great that led you to conclude that he's the most likely candidate for the historical Nimrod?
Well, it's funny because if you look at Sargon's biography, he pretty much matches up with exactly what you see going on with Nimrod, right? Nimrod starts his empire in southern Mesopotamia. And by the way, before we get to that, it's important to note that he's a descendant of Cush, right? Cush, you could spell that with a C, Derek, or you could spell that with a K. And the vowel doesn't mean anything because most ancient languages don't even express vowels. Hebrew's one of those. We're not even sure if we get all the right vowels. By the time the Masoretes are writing down vowels in whatever it is, somewhere between 100 AD and 300 AD, when they start writing down vowels to the Hebrew text, that's where it begins. Before that, there's no vowels being written. So anyway, vowels are insignificant. But Cush, biblical Cush, the forefather of Nimrod, most people want to assign or connect him geographically with Africa, right?
Right.
But that's a mistake.
Ethiopia. Yeah,
that's a mistake. There is a powerful kingdom in southern Mesopotamia called Kish. That is the most powerful kingdom until, essentially until Sargon, right? And Sargon actually derives from or comes from the city of Kish. He was the cupbearer to the king of Kish.
Okay.
And as the cupbearer, for us, cupbearer, you think, okay, that's like a butler, right? And what's the big deal with the butler? He's a really low guy. It's not like that in the ancient world. A cupbearer was like the vizier in Egypt, the second in command to the king. That's how high the cupbearer was in Mesopotamian culture. So he had this position of second in command, and somehow we don't even know all the ins and outs because Sargon's biography is limited in preservation because we didn't discover his capital city of Akkad. It's never been located yet. So we don't have texts from an archive from his own city. But if we were to have an archive, I think it would be a lot more explanatory. But the bottom line is he started in Kish, which again would match with biblical Cush. And the first city that it says that he has in the itinerary is, what does it start with? Does it start with, it's either Uruk or what we read as Babel. Do you have?
I'm looking at Genesis 10, beginning at verse 8. And again, verses 8 through 12 of Genesis 10 are the only verses that even refer to Nimrod, except in passing later in the Bible. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar.
So, and you and I already mentioned or you already mentioned that the Babel there, that would be better taken as Eridu, not Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
So Eridu, it's in southern Mesopotamia. And then the next city, Erech, there's a word, there's a toponym, and the name of a city that we use in ancient studies called Uruk, right? Like we were talking about the Uruk expansion in the late Uruk period. The city Uruk equals biblical Erech. So it's Eridu first, then Uruk, and by the way, this is a purely northward movement as Moses is listing these. And then he gets to, so Babel and Erech, and then what does it say from there?
From there, it is Akkad.
Okay.
And then Kalna.
Mm-hmm.
But I understand that is actually maybe a mistranslation. It may actually mean all of them in the land of Shinar.
Yes, and I agree with that. And that view was proposed by William Albright.
Okay.
Plenty of things he gets wrong, but lots of things he also gets right, and he's right on that one. So, yeah, so next is Akkad, and that's the capital. That's what Nimrod makes as his capital city. So, and then from there he goes into the land of Syria, right? Or I'm sorry, not Syria. That's to the northwest. Assyria. Assyria. But Akkad then represents this continuation, this northward continuation in the itinerary that Moses gives. But it makes no sense, Derek, if Babel there equals Babylon of Daniel's day, right? Because then you'd be going from Babylon in central Mesopotamia down to Uruk and then back up to Akkad, which is north of where Babylon is. So this would be guilty there of, I don't know, it's like, not getting his yo-yo moves right. He's moving all around. But there's a clear delineation, just like in when Moses gives the borders of the promised land. He goes blow by blow. If he's giving the northern border, he goes from, like the northwest all the way to the northeastern point. And it's perfectly, one after another as you go along. And same with the eastern border, and same with the southern border. So Moses typically, in these passages, in these geographical passages, he'll give a specific order, a clear order. But it doesn't make sense if Babylon is this Babel. So all that to say, back to your original question, we see this modeling of Nimrod's kingdom with Sargon's kingdom. He starts at Kish. He takes over. He becomes king there. He defeats a powerful king called Anatum, and then he expands his kingdom northward. And then, oddly enough, where does he go next? As far as we know, he talks about several places he goes. He goes to Elam in the east. He goes to southeastern Turkey in the west, if you will, northwest. But what it usually talks about in the sources more than anything else is that he goes into Assyria. And according to archaeological excavations that have been done at sites throughout ancient Assyria, what we see is this footprint of this attack of the southern Mesopotamians, and it matches up chronologically perfectly with Sargon of Akkad. And we see this taking over of the cities there, and this implementation of the technological advances that had been going on in southern Mesopotamia, where culture was always, early on at least, was always more advanced than anywhere else. So these cultural innovations and these military innovations and these weaponry innovations and construction and so forth, they all rear their head in these cities that the Akkadians conquer up in Assyria. So, if you would have kept reading the list of the other cities, they're all in Assyria, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Nineveh, Rehoboth, Kala, and Reason between Nineveh and Kala, that is the great city. Mm-hmm. So, and given that when you're starting out from what is today southeastern Iraq, which is essentially sand and marshland, you don't really have anything in the way of stone or metal or wood or timber for raw materials for your war machine for your empire, which is why the earlier Uruk expansion, the Uruk Empire extended all the way up into the Taurus Mountains of eastern Turkey.
Yes.
Because if you want silver, if you want copper, if you want timber, if you want stone, You're going to have to go there, or you're going to have to go to, especially for timber, to the mountains of Lebanon.
Yep.
How far did Sargon get? How far did he extend his kingdom?
That's a question that we can't even answer. But there are lots of sites on his itinerary that he talks about that he conquers, right? And that includes Ebla, the great city of Ebla, which is way into Syria, which is very close to the area you were talking about, the Taurus Mountains, to the north of that in southeastern Turkey. So there are sites like that, and there's the site of Mari that he also captured. And I argue, there's a whole chapter I devote to, okay, what ancient people destroyed Ebla? And what they left behind was this amazing archive of texts, right? The textual archive at Ebla. And it gives us all this incredible insight about what these ancient peoples were up to, whom they were attacking, and what cities they were overtaking, and what natural resources they were acquiring, and so forth. And there was this jousting constantly between Ebla in Syria and Mari along the Euphrates. Mari's basically, let's just say, in poor man's terms, Mari's halfway between Ebla and Akkad, or southern Mesopotamia, right? So Mari is the big player along the river to control access to the acquisition of all these resources you're talking about: timber and tin and bronze,
copper,
to be able to make
silver,
bronze items, and so forth, and silver. All of these important natural resources are located to the northwest of southern Mesopotamia. So Mari is the centerpiece of all of this, and Mari develops this enormous city, or becomes this enormous city that basically controls all of this traffic, all of this this trade and transport. And so what Sargon does is he takes out the middleman. He attacks and destroys Mari. And with that destruction of Mari, he now becomes the main player to gain access to all of those resources up to the northwest.
Yeah, it was reading Mesopotamian history is just a long series of conflicts between city-states to the northwest, like Ebla, and then later Aleppo, the kingdom of Yamkhad, Mari, which is on the Euphrates River, right close to the border between Syria and Iraq today, and then the kingdoms in the southeast, like Babylon and Ur and Uruk, and the Elamites, who would come from what is now Iran, to try to control it. Because again, if you want to get that stuff out of what is now Turkey, you've got to float it down the river, and whoever controls the river then controls that trade. I think it is interesting, and I've looked at the career of Sargon to some extent because of some of the records of who he worshipped and where. When he was at Mari, and when he went further up the river, there was a city called Tutul that was a very important worship center for the god Dagon, who was equated with Enlil, the creator god or father god of the Mesopotamians, but also El of the Canaanites, Kumarbi of the Hurrians and Hittites to the north. And he sacrificed there and basically left a record that Dagon had granted him all of this territory as part of his conquest. I find that really interesting because that character Enlil is one of the most important deities in ancient Mesopotamia, with a long history that goes back to almost the prehistoric era. What is it then about Sargon as a person and his career that has led for centuries, both outside the Bible, biblically, and even some secret societies, to venerate this character who we've dubbed Nimrod?
Mm-hmm. It's essentially the fact that he enjoyed a success in military conquest that nobody before him did. It's like the Holy Grail. He found the Holy Grail in that he conquered all the points on the compass in the ancient, at least in the civil, what they would call probably some equivalent of this, the civilized world, right? They didn't go to the extremes of the earth. But in their area, the civilized area of the ancient Near East, he conquered in every direction. He accomplished what every preceding Mesopotamian king wanted to do, but never could. Never had the power, never had the army, never had the right timing, where other nations or other city-states were weak enough where he could conquer them and where his army could grow and he could be dominant. So he achieved the unachievable. And that left an impression, an impact on all of the ancient Mesopotamian at least, and some others, but at least all the ancient Mesopotamian cultures. They saw him as this incredible figure who could do what nobody before him could do, and that automatically gave him, in their minds, this respect, this status, this, larger than life. It's like, for those of us who love NBA basketball, Wilt Chamberlain, he scored 100 points in the game, and nobody's going to do that again, Derek. I'm sorry, but it's not going to happen. Kobe Bryant or, nobody. And we have this view toward Wilt Chamberlain that he was this incredible player who could do things nobody else could, and we kind of stack other people against him. Shaq was always stacked up against Wilt Chamberlain, and all the other great centers were measured by Wilt. So Sargon had that same aura about him for the ancient Mesopotamians. And I actually, Derek, deal with a number of succeeding kings who become empire builders. And I think I pretty much ended around, I think I ended with the Neo-Babylonian Empire. But I hop and skip with some of the major players who themselves were able to achieve this. And a lot of them, Derek, use the same title of themselves that Nimrod used of himself, and they use the one that his grandson, Naram Sin, created. So Sargon referred to himself as the king of Sumer and Akkad, right? So that basically meant all of the ancient world. It's southern Mesopotamia and central Mesopotamia, and that's like the hub of the world. So they themselves would call themselves by that name that he used. And they would call themselves by the King of the Four Corners is the name that his grandson Naram Sin used of his version of the empire that was handed down to him, from his, if you go back far enough, to his grandfather, Sargon of Akkad. So what you see is this copying, this, copycat thing, where they want to be, it's like with kids who grew up today, they want to be like Mike. They want to be like Michael Jordan, right? So they model their game after Michael Jordan's game. And that's what these empire builders did. They modeled their desires for expansion and for growth and prosperity and wealth and domination and subjugation. They matched it against Sargon, and they even borrowed his titles, right? And the title of his grandson. So what that tells me is this is the guy, right? This is the Wilt Chamberlain of the ancient world.
How is it then that we wind up conflating Nimrod with whoever it was who was the builder of the Tower of Babel? How do we wind up with that as sort of just not even questioned anymore?
Yeah, great question. And again, I think it all comes down to this sense that we've got to be religiously viewing Genesis 10 and Genesis 11 as a continuing, a continuous flow of events chronologically. And so it doesn't really make sense if Nimrod's not part of the Tower of Babel. And here's why, Derek, it doesn't make sense. And also, this proves, I think, ultimately, historically, even if you put the Bible aside for a moment and just talk about historically, just from a logical perspective, for me as a historian, right? I'm an ancient Near Eastern historian. My PhD is in ancient Near Eastern history and archaeology. And I look at the Tower of Babel scenario, right? Well, what's significant about that city? What's significant about it, Derek, is it was the first full-blown urban center in history, or at least since the flood, right? We don't know what's before the flood. There were cities and whatnot, so we can't talk much about that. But after the flood, it was the first legitimate urban settlement, fully urban. What does that mean?
Remembered by the Sumerians as the first city, where kingship was first lowered down from heaven.
Yeah, right. The Sumerian king list says that the first city that received that after the flood, that received the kingship
after the flood,
was
right.
Eridu, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the city that you and I are connecting to biblical Babel of, not Daniel's day, but biblical Babel of Genesis 10 and Genesis 11. So with the Tower of Babel, that's clearly the first urban center. What does it have? It has a king. It has a centralized authority, so there's a governmental structure. It undoubtedly has a scribal class, which we can see from what's been preserved there. It has public works. It has monumental architecture. It has a defensive wall. It has a what we call canalization, which is a sewage system or a drainage system, right? All of the features that even today modern cities have that we kind of take for granted, that make life easy, that, if we were to move out to Alaska, we wouldn't have any of those things and we'd forget what we had so easy. But all of those features of an actual urban center, those are present for the first time at Eridu. So that's one, and that we know, if you agree with us that it's biblical Babel of Genesis 11, that's your decision. But certainly you have to agree that that's the beginning of urbanization. But think about Nimrod, Derek. Think about this. What happens with Nimrod? He has a capital city. He expands his empire, and what does he do? He captures another city-state. And what does he do? He captures another city-state. And then he goes into another land. All of that was in the land of what the Bible refers to as Shinar. We know it in Mesopotamian studies as Shumer, southern Mesopotamia. Then he goes into Assyria. And what does he do? He conquers a city-state. And he conquers another city-state. And another. And another. And all of this, Derek, let's just think logically. He is amassing a collection, right? I collect coins. It's like looking at my whole coin collection. He's collecting city after city after city, and then looking at all that he owns. But wait a minute. How can you have a king of many cities who's living his life before there's one city? Do you see what I'm getting at? Sure, yeah. So for Babel to be what Babel is, to be the first city, it can't be after, chronologically, it can't be after Sargon of Akkad, because he's out conquering multiple cities. So you would have to suggest, I don't know, you'd have to really do a lot of gymnastics to try to get around this problem, but historically, it's a problem you can't get around. The first city has to come before the king who conquers many cities in many lands. You can't avoid the problem. Yeah. What I found interesting about Eridu, Babel, is that even as late as the Neo-Babylonian Empire, kings like Nebuchadnezzar were still referring to themselves as the king of Eridu because of its historical and religious significance throughout history. It makes sense that you would take this really infamous empire builder, the first in history, at least the first in recorded history, whose name in the Hebrew seems to be based on the word rebel, and connected to this rebellious act of building this temple above what was called the House of the Abyss. And maybe there's some significance to that. I speculate that there is, but certainly Nimrod has gotten a really bad reputation throughout history. How much of it is deserved, do you think? Good question. We're talking about Sargon of Akkad here. Sargon of Akkad, right. Yeah. Okay, whom I'm equating to Nimrod. Right. I think a huge amount is deserving. I think even, Derek, that all we see, all we know, all that has been preserved, that at least up until today has been excavated or has been discovered, it's the tip of the iceberg. I think he's way worse. A man reached out to me who is a retired professor of art and art history. And he said to me, I really like your work, and if you need someone to draw your images for you, he said, I have a lot of experience and I have a lot of heart. He said, I'd love to work for someone who loves God and loves the Word of God rather than, someone who's doing something very differently. So when I told him about this project and offered to him to be my illustrator, he jumped all over it.
Wow.
So he took several images of Sargon that I presented for him, and he brought them to life. Images that survived in a fragmented or limited, damaged sense, and he made them full. He made them whole, and they'll be on the front and back covers of this. And one of them is a scene where Sargon, where his troops have finished the battle and they've won, and what you see is the remnant of what's left. What do you see? A bunch of bodies strewn across the battlefield, and then you see wild dogs who are chewing on the corpses, and you see vultures who are, some that are circling, some of them are dive bombing, and others that are picking away at the flesh of these soldiers. And and they depict vulture after vulture, body after body, right? To give the viewer a sense of the enormity of the carnage that took place at that battle site, right? And that's just one physical remnant. And remember, Sargon's archives were never discovered because we haven't discovered his capital city of Akkad, let alone excavated there. So if we find it and we excavate there and we find an archive, that's where maybe we can start getting below the tip of the iceberg. So I think we have a very limited understanding of how brutal and devastating and game-changing his rule was, because he wiped out so many people, it's beyond count.
I'm familiar with the victory stela of Naram Sin, his grandson, and clearly there's a lot of dead bodies on the front of that inscription. I've read that some scholars believe that the city of Akkad might be underneath modern-day Baghdad, which means we will probably never get to it if that's the case. But what connection is there between the growth of the Akkadian Empire and the brutality of those soldiers and the sudden appearance of all of these massive defensive walls in the Bronze Age, cities in the Bronze Age? Suddenly, previously where cities were pretty much unwalled or had very basic walls, suddenly they got these massive defensive walls. Is there a connection there?
Yeah, certainly. We have the beginning of this this endless continuation of attack and incorporation and expansion and imperialism that, again, Sargon is the first to perfect it. And things already were difficult enough in Mesopotamia before Sargon came along. This is known as the early dynastic period. Before the Akkadian period, it's the early dynastic period. And in that, you have this constant warfare between certain city-states. And that provokes the need for virtually every city, if it wanted to guarantee, or at least to come as close as it could to guaranteeing independence, the people in that city would build a wall, build a defensive wall. So what they did under the Akkadians, they ramped all of this up. So if there were sites that didn't have walls before, they had to have them by the time the Akkadians rolled around. And again, archaeology now has shown us with the sites that we have been able to excavate, and it's difficult because, yes, we're talking about Iraq, we're talking about Iran, places where they're not so friendly to, Western people, for us, we want to study these ancient sites and learn more. What was there? Who was there? Can we read about what they did and who they conquered and so forth? and all these stories that are waiting to be uncovered, they're not as open to that as we would like. But for the cities that are, they're revealing to us that this war machine came along and they did things like nobody else before them. They just were systematic and had the power to be able to intervene and take out city after city. So the whole landscape just shows us that we have this game-changing moment with the rise of the Akkadian Empire. And that's another reason, Derek, why, and to get to your point, the Bronze Age, usually we're looking at the Holy Land, right? Ancient Canaan and Phoenicia and Syria and so forth, the land that the Bible treats more. But there's a reverberating effect. Or it's like, you throw a stone into a quiet pond and the bounce or the wave is going to be the greatest in a circle right around where it hits, right? And the further away you get, the less of a wave it is by that time. And that's kind of the same thing. But still, the whole ancient Near East, there's this reverberating effect that even in the Levant, even in Canaan, Syria, and so forth, you have cities that just have to defend themselves, and in some cases that follow the model that Sargon began, where you try to attack and conquer the city-states and nations around you.
And that continued for a long, long time, as we see in the biblical, when you get deeper into biblical history with the Assyrians and the Egyptians and the Babylonians. And it's just, a long history of violence that has not ended to this day, sadly. Doug, what do you hope people take away from reading the book, Nimrod the Empire Builder?
I hope they take away the sense of what God allowed to happen in a world where he freed people up to exercise their free will. I'm amazed that there are Christians out there, many of them who love theology, who try to tell us that the free will died at the fall. You don't understand what's going on in the world or in ancient history or in recent modern history if you think the free will isn't alive and kicking. And what Sargon represents is a thirst to control, a thirst for power, a thirst to quench the unquenchable desire of the ego. And he took it to the umpteenth degree, to the greatest degree. And think about when Moses is writing this. The Israelites are right about to cross the Jordan Rift Valley, including the Jordan River itself, and go into the land of Canaan and take over, right? They're going to live among the Canaanites. God knows they're not going to wipe out the Canaanites like he instructed them to do, doesn't he? So they had to prepare, God had to prepare them to live successfully in the midst of people who were violently opposed to the things that they were supposed to embrace. And hopefully they did embrace. They embraced a God-centered worldview, hopefully. They embraced God himself. They embraced monotheism, so that you're only worshiping one God and not other gods, and so forth. The whole Christmas list. So the Israelites are supposed to embrace those things. And Moses knew the day was going to come that they would have a king, didn't he? Because he talked about what things were going to be like when a king would arise. He's going to take your silver and gold. He's going to take your sons and all of this, right? And there's going to be a lot of negative to it. And if he leaves them, the Israelites, unprepared for this, then they could be in trouble. But if he kind of uses the story of Nimrod as a photograph for them, so that they can look at and see all these features of, an ugly person in this photograph. This is what happens when you, as a nation that rise and become more powerful, and God blesses you and your borders, expand, and you all of a sudden are tempted, maybe, to conquer other cities and conquer other kingdoms and conquer other peoples. Look at the example of Sargon. This is what happens when sin and selfishness and ego goes out of control, right? So, Derek, that's an example not only for the Israelites and the nation they're going to start, so that their king doesn't become like the king known as Sargon, known as Nimrod, that we know in history, for me, as Sargon. Not only is that true, but there's applicational value for us as believers. How? I've been an ordained pastor since the late 90s, Derek. I've been in church plants. I've been an associate pastor. I've been a senior pastor. And I've been a seminary professor. And I can tell you what. The church and Christian institutions that are training people to be leaders in the church, they don't always act like they're supposed to act. And I'm talking about the people in charge. I'm talking about the pastors. I'm talking about the elders. I'm talking about seminary presidents. And I'm talking about seminary administrators. And I've seen it time after time, over and over again. Derek, what happens when they get power in their hands? There's an old adage, I talk about it in the book. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. Mm-hmm. It's never enough. You get in power, that's never enough. You want to you want to express your power over the other people around you who have power and show that you're more powerful than they are, right? You get in a corporation. Let's say you work outside of the church, outside of any Christian institution. You work in a factory. You work in a corporate setting. You are elevated into a high position. The temptation is going to come to you to do what? To control, to get power, to keep your power, to gain more power, and it will never be enough. You will want to keep conquering and conquering and conquering. And the example of Nimrod, I hope, Derek, would touch our lives enough to say, whatever position of authority, and that's the word I like, Derek, whatever position of authority God gives me, I want to exercise no power in it. In fact, my seminary professor, when I was a student, really instilled this in us. And here's what he told us, Derek. He said, when power is given to you, he said there are three things to do with it. You push it away, you push it away, you push it away. That's what you do. You never keep it to yourself. And I applied that, Derek, when I moved to Siberia and I was invited to become a church planting pastor there. And so I was the man. Nobody in the church there, in the church plant, had more authority than I did. And I could have looked in the mirror and, enjoyed what I saw. Mm-hmm. But I refused. I could have exercised this authority over people in any way I wanted to, Derek, and nobody would have stopped me. I had that ability. But you know what? There's something that was in here and in here that was going on. It's called the fear of God. And I refused to embrace that power. And I always had this perspective. If the Word of God addresses the issue, I'm going to let the power stay with the Holy Spirit through the Word of God. Because it's Christ's church, not mine. I'm just the guy temporarily overseeing the church that belongs to Jesus Christ. It's his. That church was his. And I'm not going to take his power. I don't want to mess with that. So I purposefully prevented myself from embracing any of that power. And I pushed it away, pushed it away, pushed it away. And I let God's word rule in that church. And Derek, if you as a leader have this principle as a something that you operate by, something you live by, and you apply it, it's the most freeing thing in the world. Because you see yourself a little bit better the way God sees you, rather than what your ego does to make you look much better, that you've been, doctored up with all of this makeup and everything. You don't look that good. Okay? God sees the heart. He knows the heart. He knows that we're fallible people, every one of us, with whatever position he gives us. And he can take it away in a moment. So we better hold on to it loosely, Derek. We better not embrace that power. We better not keep it to ourselves. We better divest it, divest it, divest it. That's what I hope they walk away with. That
is true wisdom. I mean, even a true Satanist like Karl Marx saw it in his Communist Manifesto. Marx and Engels wrote that people in power tend to consolidate power. Of course, their answer to that was to put different people in power rather than to decentralize power and give it away. Doug, I know you've got an Indiegogo campaign going on to get some backing to get this book into the hands of people, actually to get it printed. Talk about where people can go to help. That's not just Nimrod the Empire Builder, but get a second printing of Origins of the Hebrews.
Sure. Yeah, and the third printing of Origins of the Hebrews needs to happen. I'm down to one box of books left of the second printing. And the first printing of the Nimrod book needs to happen, and I just don't have the resources to do it myself at the moment. So, I started this Indiegogo campaign. It's going to end October 19th, and probably I'll send you the link, and you can make it available. But you could probably otherwise just Google Indiegogo, Douglas Petrovich, Nimrod campaign or something like that, and I imagine it would pop up. But we're trying to raise $21,000 right now. At the moment, as I speak, there's $4,500 that's raised, and I'd love it if anybody could contribute if any amount. There are perks there so if you give a certain amount, you can get these certain kind of fun things to make it an exciting thing more than just giving away money. But know that it's going to a great cause to be able to make good biblical resources available to people that are going to stand behind and elevate and support the historicity of the Bible and the veracity of Scripture. So, you can be part of that if you'd like. When the book is ready to be sold, it will be available on Amazon and through several consigners who will be selling it for me, as well as I'll sell it out of my own house, and I'll make signed copies for people, and I'll actually ship them myself. I'm a one-man show, Derek. I'll ship them to people. I did it with Origins of the Hebrews, and I make a better commission on it, better royalty on it. So you're welcome to buy it directly through me.
No, we're right there with you. I go to the post office in town here about 3 times a week with a laundry basket full of stuff. So. I will put a link in the notes, and as I've said before, we highly recommend Doug's earlier books, Origins of the Hebrews and The World's Oldest Alphabet. This looks like a real edifying book. Nimrod is not who we thought he was, but we can tie him to a historical character, and he was certainly not a nice man, which is why he's been remembered. But maybe this is peeling back some of the smoke and some of the dirt from the historical Nimrod. And again, we'll put a link in the notes to the Indiegogo campaign, also to Doug's academia page. You can go back and look at his papers if you are so inclined, which is something that I've done. I think I've saved about half of them to my personal hard drive here. Doug Petrovich, thank you for taking time out of your schedule. Thank you for putting the research in and writing the book, and look forward to talking with you again soon. I'll put links in the notes below this program, whether you're watching or listening. And by the way, information on how you can prevent us from being canceled, keep us from being canceled, coming up in just a minute. Links to where you can find Doug's feed on X, formerly Twitter, and also his page at academia.edu, where he's got a lot of his papers there. His paper on the Pharaoh of the Exodus, I think I have cited it in 3 different books now, so you definitely want to dig into what he's got there. Again, those will be in the show notes below this program. Coming up, oh yes, bless their pointy little heads, Democrats have a problem. They're too white. Yes, it is causing fear and consternation. We'll tell you more about that straight ahead, and information on the new Skywatch TV virtual conference ahead as A View from the Bunker continues.
Hi, everybody. Believe it or not, this is October, and that means you get a brand new GHTV special offer.
We're approaching Halloween, the time of year when the world around us is focused on ghosts and goblins and devils and demons.
But they're real.
They're real, and we'd like to give you good information about those entities with our October special. First, our book Veneration, where we analyze the ancient cult of the Nephilim, the origin of demons exposed in this book. Vicki Joy Anderson's important book, They Only Come Out at Night, about night terrors and sleep paralysis.
You need this book at home for your kids and grandkids. Trust me, it is a great book.
And 7 hours of audio interviews with the late Dr. Michael Heiser about the nature of the unseen realm.
Oh, this is a collector's disc.
It really is. Altogether, these 3 items purchased separately worth $65 during the month of October, just $35 plus shipping and handling. Take advantage of this because this is good, solid, scholarly information, especially the content from Dr. Heiser.
It is, and particularly this month, you want to be armed with the truth when your family asks, what about witches? What about wizards? What about these things at Halloween? What do we do with this? It's a time to teach.
Absolutely. Take advantage of our October special offer, Veneration, They Only Come Out at Night, and The Unseen Adversary, yours for just $35 plus shipping and handling only at gilberthouse.org/store. Aaron Lipkin, the CEO of Lipkin Tours, joins me. He is making it possible for the Gilbert House Ministries Tour of Israel in 2024 with our special guest, Tim Alberino. Aaron, what can people expect when they come to Israel with Lipkin Tours?
Well, Derek, we're going to be visiting all the major biblical sites where the stories in the Bible really happened. We're going to be in Jerusalem, the city of the king. We're going to go to Temple Mount, the city of David. We're going to visit the Garden Tomb. We're going to visit all these important biblical sites in the holy capital of the state of Israel, but not just there. We're going to go to Galilee, visit Capernaum, visit these important sites that are really mysterious sites. They're sites that are megalithic. They were built thousands of years ago. And who built them and why were they built? These are all things we're going to be visiting and checking. And obviously, aside from going on to these amazing biblical sites, we're also going to enjoy Israel. People will be enjoying the Dead Sea. They're going to be floating in the lowest place on earth. We're going to be visiting Second Temple sites like Masada and other important sites from the time of Jesus.
This is an amazing tour. It's one of a kind because Lipkin Tours is willing to go places that others will not. We'll also see important sites like Shiloh, and of course the megalithic sites. Basically, you're getting a look at Israel from Genesis to Revelation, the entirety of the biblical narrative in the span of a couple of weeks, alongside Sharon, me, and our special guest, Timothy Alberino. Aaron Lipkin and his team does a wonderful job of putting this all together. For more information, go online to gilbertsinisrael.com. gilbertsinisrael.com. Aaron, we look forward to seeing you in the Holy Land.
Same here. Shalom from the Holy Land.
Talking the Walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker online, VFTB.net. You'll also find us at gilberthouse.org, gilberthouse.org. If you're watching on YouTube, God bless you. Subscribe, hit that bell for notifications, share the links around with your friends, and then please guarantee that we never get canceled by downloading our free app. This app for your smartphone or tablet not only brings all of our content to you, not just this weekly program, but our weekly Bible study, the Gilbert House Fellowship, which is really the heart and soul of everything that Sharon and I do, our weekly broadcast program, Unraveling Revelation, PID Radio, the podcast that we have brought back that started everything for us back in 2005, including a lot of the archives going back to 2005. All of that in one handy little package, along with an audio Bible with multiple translations, calendar of upcoming events, calendar of upcoming Bible readings, bonus content available through the app, and much, much more. All of that right in the palm of your hand, whether it's iOS, Android, Amazon, Kindle Fire. Again, you'll find it at our website, VFTB.net, or better yet, go to gilberthouse.org/app and get that app for your device. And while you're there, get our Roku or Apple TV app for your set-top box as well. The political scene this week has just been really nuts, frankly. I can't say I blame Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida for filing the motion to vacate the speaker, and that would be Speaker Kevin McCarthy, who on Tuesday was voted out because enough Republicans upset with his leadership joined with Democrats who, of course, want to see the minority leader, Hakeem Jeffries, take over. That's not going to happen, but we are now in the entertaining season of politics. But Democrats, meanwhile, have their own issue, their own series of problems, really causing some stress inside the Democratic Party leadership. And this was reported by Politico earlier this week. Democratic National Committee members are alarmed that the committee and the Democratic Party is falling short of its own diversity goals. They are warning that if current trends inside the Democratic Party, as far as delegates for the National Convention next summer, are not changed, if they don't change, the delegates will be too white when they gather next summer to, at least as of this point, officially renominate President Joe Biden. Because at least as of this recording in early October of 2023, the word is still officially that Joe Biden is going to run for re-election. Politico interviewed a half dozen current and former members of the Democratic National Committee, and according to Politico, heightened concern that the delegates the party may end up sending to the convention next year won't be as diverse as they think it should be. Now, this really isn't too surprising because they are really trying to stem the trend of Latino and black voters going to the Republican Party that began with Donald Trump's campaign back in 2016. They really need to hold on to those voters if they want to have a chance of winning back the House and holding on to the White House in 2024. But understand what this means. Understand what this means. The Democratic National Committee is actually saying they're afraid they might not have enough people of color at the convention next summer to renominate the old white guy who wants to be president for a second term. As I have said previously, being a liberal means never having to deal with cognitive dissonance. Bless their pointy little heads. Well, we've got a couple of things to tell you about coming up in just a few weeks. I'll be in North Dakota at the Pitchfork and Hoe Gathering, which sounds like a really fun gathering, a small farmer series of workshops and demonstrations on how to run a successful and healthy small farm. I will be speaking on Friday, October 27th and Saturday, October 28th, talking about giants in the Bible and why they're not fringe, but really important. And then on Saturday night, as we approach Halloween, demons, dragons, and devils. They're all in the Bible, and that's how God refers to them in the Bible. So let's deal with the reality of these things. So if you are anywhere in, say, eastern North Dakota, western Minnesota, northeastern South Dakota, northwestern Wisconsin even, Valley City, North Dakota, this will be at the Valley City Eagles Club, Friday and Saturday, October 27th and 28th. And I hope to see you there. We have news now on the Skywatch TV virtual conference. It launches November 11th of 2023. The theme is Confronting the Darkness, and I will be putting together a presentation on the Essenes of the first century and how they influenced not just Christian theology, but where those Essenes specifically were located and why Jesus chose to base his ministry where he did. We're learning that when Jesus confronted the darkness, he did it at a very specific place. And it wasn't Jerusalem, surprisingly enough, which is where you'd assume that he would have set up his ministry. No, he was actually based on the far side of the Sea of Galilee. Why did he go there? Talk about that, and I'll show you some drone footage, actually, of some of the locations we think are connected to his ministry. So you can find out more and register for Skywatch TV's next virtual conference, Confronting the Darkness, at defenderconference.com. That's defenderconference.com. And if you'd like to see some of those locations with your own eyes, join us in Israel next spring as Sharon and I host our next Gilbert House Ministries tour of Israel with our special guest, Timothy Alberino. That's March 31st through April 9th. Of 2024. We will take you places, of course, all the important sites you want to see. We'll go to Jerusalem, the Temple Mount, the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, Nazareth, and much more. But we'll also take you to sites that you might not think are directly related to the Bible and to Scripture, like Gilgal Rephaim, megalithic sites like the Shamir Dolmen Field, and the dolmen recently discovered with the 50-ton capstone, a 50-ton capstone somehow levered into place on top of other stones more than 4,000 years ago. How'd that happen? Well, we'll explain why we think that's relevant. Take the optional 3-day extension and join us over in Jordan, too. We'll take you to Wadi Rum, the Red Desert, the ancient land of Edom. We'll take you to Petra and explain why we believe that was historically and also prophetically significant, and more. Information and registration at gilbertsinisrael.com. That's gilbertsinisrael.com. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule to watch or listen, as the case may be. And if you get a spare moment, we appreciate a comment or your review at, wherever you find us, which is Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker. We're working now on Sirius XM, but of course, we are wherever fine podcasts are sold. Our announcer, the inimitable D.C. Good, and A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, not commercial, no derivatives 4.0 international license. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.